The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I am co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit to nonprofits. Our line of credit program is easy, fast, and inexpensive, making it a great cash backup plan. From my own personal experience, I really believe that every nonprofit should have a line of credit in place just in case, especially because the line of credit costs nothing to set up. If you would like to learn more about our line of credit program, please visit us at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And if you decide to apply today, we will even give you a $250 credit on file that you can use if you need to use your line. Or feel free to give us a call at 862-207-4118. On a personal level, I have a 25-year career of building companies, and I have the privilege to speak with nonprofit executive directors on a daily basis. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and please subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app so you can hear future podcasts. Today, I am excited to be speaking with Doug Borwick, CEO of Outfitters 4. For 3 decades, Doug Borwick served as a director of the not-for-profit management and arts management programs at Salem College in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. At Salem, Doug created the major in not-for-profit management, and in 1997, Doug was appointed Salem Distinguished Professor. Doug Borwick is a sought-after speaker at conferences both nationally and internationally. Outfitters 4 is a provider of a full range of back office and planning services for nonprofits. Outfitters 4 exists to assume the burdens of routine management so nonprofits can focus on their mission. The experienced staff provides services ranging from financial and HR management to planning and consultation. Doug, welcome to the Nonprofit MBA podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
So it's like an incredible day in the Northeast today, isn't it? I know, Doug, you're out of Maryland, I think?
North Carolina.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to be with you today. So it was, when you and I were talking about what you would cover today, now I've never reported it to a board. And, we do interact with the boards for the nonprofits a little bit because and when you're getting a line of credit set up, the board has to approve the line of credit. So, that's something that's part of our process too. And when I asked you what we should talk about today, you had given me a title, which was Nonprofit Boards, the Executive Director's Best Friends. And in quotation, in parentheses, no, really, exclamation point. And I was a little taken back. I was like, wow, I always assumed that the board is there to really support the executive director. But people being people, I can understand now looking back that it can be sometimes challenging dealing with people. So why did you kind of think about this topic in that way? Out of 100 nonprofits that maybe you interact with, what percentage of them have difficulty dealing with their board?
Okay. Well, I think maybe it would be helpful to kind of back up a little bit and talk about why it's so common. If to begin with, we are in an industry where you have a group of volunteers with limited or no expertise in the work of whatever the nonprofit is doing, who are the policymakers and supervisors of the ED or the CEO. That is just a bizarre kind of situation. And when you describe it that way to people, they say, why in the world Is that a thing? And that's because of the nature of not-for-profit organizations coming out of the tax law. Boards have several roles, but one of them is to ensure that the public good is being served.
Yep.
Because nonprofits are getting the tax benefits and other benefits, but primarily the tax benefits that they get, not having to pay sales tax, not having to pay tax on income coming in, all those kinds of things. The tax law set up a system where volunteers, people who don't have a financial interest in the organization, have to be there to make sure that as I said before, the public good is being served. Yeah. So that's the reason that they're there. And that's the reason this bizarre thing is.
And
there.
I would imagine there's often not a job description. There's not a list of not a list of responsibilities for the board member. And I would imagine that's one of the first things that you get involved with, huh?
Well, and it's virtually certain that someone who does not have a long background in nonprofits is not going to have any idea of what being a board member, how a nonprofit works, but then even more so what the roles and responsibilities of a nonprofit board member are. So one of the issues is a critical one ongoing is training. The other thing that board members are supposed to do is serve the organization to help with its mission focus, to support the nature of its work in the community. And so, the principal internal function of a board is as a resource. But unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits have gotten it in their head that the only resource that boards are good for is to give money.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of boards that their only function, both as they understand it and as they're asked of the organization, is to give money, and that's not a very fulfilling thing. And it's not a good way to structure a powerful, supportive board. If we can look at boards as being resources, and certainly money is one piece of that, but there are all kinds of other things that boards bring. Lots of times expertise, although you have to be careful about assuming that for-profit expertise translates to nonprofit because there are so many differences. But this is not the time for that conversation. Right. But as a variety of other things, as boards, especially in the social service sector, but across the nonprofit world, are beginning to understand that they have issues around diversity and representation on their boards. Oftentimes connections in the community are as important a resource as money itself. And so that's something that boards need to wrestle with, and organizations need to wrestle with. Okay, what is the function of our board? We get a lot of, we get, when I've dealt with executive directors who are at a point where they can let their hair down. There are a variety of thoughts about boards. They're a necessary evil or an annoyance. They're a rubber stamp. They're a roadblock or busybodies. What we need to get to is understanding boards as a potentially invaluable community-based resource. And that is a place that we can go. I look at this a little bit like when I do meeting management or meeting development work. I say every meeting you go to ought to be meaningful, productive, and fun.
Yeah.
And if it's not, there's something wrong with either the culture or, oftentimes more to the point, the way the meeting has been structured. So that these are things that we can look at. There are ways to help boards develop and become more effective.
So give me a couple of examples where you go in to talk to an executive director. It might be a board issue to begin with. It might not be a board issue to begin with. What are a couple questions that you would ask that executive director to kind of uncover issues?
I think the first one is very simple. It's Do your board members show up for the board meetings? It's amazing how many organizations have trouble getting people to show up. And I will say almost always that's because the meetings are so boring. One of the things that I say is that as we're looking at meetings, this is in my little list of tips. You shouldn't have people just reading reports. There should be some kind of a consent agenda where people can, sort of submit ahead of time the report from a committee and people can look at it, but you don't need to talk about it. I think one of the most important things that I ever learned about making board meetings successful is the idea that every meeting should have opportunity for substantive discussion on a critical issue in the field, so that the board begins to understand what the situation is for the nonprofit out there in the community, and can then be drawn in, have enough background and understanding to be drawn into a discussion about, okay, so how can we move to improve this? And I think another thing is, in those meetings, soliciting informed advice, support beyond just the money. You can get people excited about being at a meeting if they realize that they're making a contribution that is significant.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, I haven't been on a nonprofit board. I've been like on a club board, and and I always felt, I don't know if I'm going to be good on a board because I'm a doer. And if I'm going to sit back, and I think a lot of successful people tend to be doers.
Right.
And if I'm going to be at a meeting, it better be good.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons why I kind of like question, would I fit well on a nonprofit board, because I'm just, I'm impatient. I want things to happen. I want to contribute. I'm willing to do a lot. I'm willing to give money, but it's got to be well run.
Right.
And is that a common occurrence?
Yes. And that's, the underutilization of the potential of a board is one of the principal reasons that board meetings and board service can be enervating. It's just why am I here? What am I doing about this? And I would say, the question of being a doer, there are plenty of things that boards can provide help and support with. Community connections is one that comes immediately to mind. Certainly supporting fundraising, because there is that fiduciary responsibility that falls to a board. But that shouldn't be the total extent of it. Being involved in mission evaluation, in planning work. And I think one of the principal things that, especially people coming from the for-profit world, but this is true of just people generally coming in, that with respect to the staff, the board's role is to hire, support, and evaluate the CEO, but not the other staff. The CEO is the one who is responsible for hiring their staff, and that should be their job. And if the board has issues about the staff, then that's part of the evaluation of the CEO.
Yeah.
In training, one of the things that I often talk about, and I can't remember where I stole this from, but it's been helpful, is to tell the board, when you are together in the room as the board of directors, you are the organization. From the point of view of the state, the way the legal structure is set up, they are the organization. And when they're in that room, they have their board of director hat on. When they leave the room and are out of that meeting, they leave that hat in the room, and they are just the individual that they are. If they walk into the office, they're not a board member with responsibility that needs to be taken seriously. They are a volunteer. Someone there to help, because one of the fastest ways to undermine a CEO, an executive director, is to have a board member come in and start giving orders or making requests of staff members who report to the ED, because those people know that the board is the boss of the staff. So if the of the executive director, so that they know if the boss of the executive director is telling me to do something, I guess I better do it. But sometimes that conflicts with what the ED knows they need to do.
What do you do when you have like a person on the board who's a maverick, who's causing problems?
That's a very individual thing. Lots of times that comes from just a lack of understanding of what they're supposed to be doing, and not having enough appropriate work for them to do. So that sometimes that can be channeled. I think there are occasions of people who are just who are of the mindset. This is one category of the mindset that I'm given $50,000 a year, I should be able to tell you what to do. And money does talk, but it can get the organization in trouble. So what I strongly advocate is an annual board evaluation. And one piece of that certainly is evaluation of the work of the board as a whole. But I also believe that there should be evaluation of individual board members. The way that's done is at the beginning of a year, have each member set up goals for themselves and commitments of what they're going to do with respect to fundraising, with respect to attending meetings, all other kinds of things. And then at the into 9 months or towards the end of the year, have a board governance committee. And these are board people. A board governance committee that will sit down with each of the board members and say, okay, so how did we do? And it provides an opportunity, for instance, for a board member who has had a really rough year to say, okay, I didn't meet these goals and these are the reasons why. Or to have a conversation about, I'm not sure that the direction of this organization is where I want to, be spending my time. And it provides, it's not necessarily pleasant, but it provides a much less intrusive opportunity for the two parties, the board as a whole and the individual board member, to say, okay, let's just sort of say this is not working. We can go on from there. It clearly is not easy, and particularly if the conflict is with the executive director. In a situation like that, there has to be a strong board president who can step in and say, okay, this is just, to the board member, this is just not appropriate, and we've got to figure out either a way to dial it back, or we can't afford this in the board.
Do you think there's a standard methodology? Let's say you're a smaller nonprofit, like $1 million or $2 million, and you really haven't put together much with your board. You have, in other words, you don't have job descriptions, you don't have the end of the year evaluation. Is there a standard methodology that either you or your organization has that you say, okay, you got to do this, and this?
Sure, there are lots of very kind of typical normal things that we can go in, or other board development people can go in and talk about. And I would say that the things to be looking at are the whole recruitment and training process. With respect to recruitment
of the board.
Yes. With respect to recruitment, it should not be a sort of 3-week thing towards the end of the year where a nominating committee pulls a bunch of names out of the hat. There should be, over the course of the year, like a tickler file where people's names are put in. And one of the best approaches for that is to with board committees, with the work that the board has to do, have people who are not board members on some of those committees, so that those people can get to know the organization, and the organization can get to know them, because that's a great pool of potential board members on down the road. And it has the advantage of being able to provide access to some diversity that oftentimes is not available on the board. So I think recruitment is a big thing. Training, certainly, talking about, okay, what is the nature of training? And certainly its roles and responsibilities, because especially with smaller organizations, a lot of people don't realize what a significant legal responsibility there is in being a board member. There's certainly the responsibility of the board as a whole, but there's also individual responsibility, going back to the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience, where individual board members can be on the hook, which is a reason that for D&O insurance. But it's important for board members to understand those kinds of things, and things like with the fiduciary responsibility. I always talk about many boards. Again, these are smaller ones often. There's one person on the board, like the treasurer, who, when the financial report comes up, everybody looks at them, they nod their head, and so everybody votes yes. The fact of the matter is that every member of the board is individually responsible for understanding those financials and agreeing that this is a reasonable expression of who we are as an organization. And it's possible to train people even who don't have a financial background to read those things sufficiently. So those, the recruitment, the training process for that, and it shouldn't be one time and then you forget it. The training needs to be, I would say, at least annual, because with new people coming on the board, they need to be in the same place as everybody else. Plus, people forget, and they need reminders, and and that's also a conversation about where we are today, how are things going with respect to implementing the plan, and then putting in a process for board evaluation.
It seems like the executive directors, especially at smaller nonprofits. I mean, when we're talking smaller, say maybe under $7 million revenue a year. The executive directors have so many hats they're wearing.
Yes.
It almost seems like an executive director should get someone on the board who's the board president or someone on there to say, listen, how can we make the board more effective and more helpful?
Yes.
And then that person either works with you or runs with, okay, this is how we're going to improve. Is that more normally the case?
That's when I get called in, if it's not a sort of crisis with the executive director and the board. Most often, it's an executive director who has found an ally on the board who realizes that change needs to happen. So yes, that is a very common, and it's far easier because it's really a strange circumstance where there is this group of people who are not expert in what the organization does, who are the bosses of the executive director.
Yeah, I would think that the board would love the structure, honestly.
Yeah. Most of them do.
Yeah. So we have about 5 minutes left. So so far we've talked about identifying job responsibilities on the board. We've talked about training of the board. We talked about making the meetings interesting so that people want to come to the meetings. We've talked about recruiting and doing that more consistently and not waiting to the end of the year and having a tickler file of people that could be good board members. We talked a little bit about mavericks or people who are challenging. What what else would you say is? And did I miss any?
I think I think that's pretty much what we have covered.
Yeah.
I think the one other thing that I would talk about is that the nature and role of a board changes to a certain extent anyway, changes as organizations get older and as they grow.
Yeah.
There are life cycles in organizations, and there is generally, and the very, very small ones, the startups that have a founder who sort of brings a bunch of people together and has them be the board of directors. Oftentimes, those people have no clue the organization and don't want a clue, and the founder doesn't really want them to have a clue.
Yeah.
The founder wants to do what the founder wants to do. But that almost always, after the startup or founder period, almost always results in a crisis having to do with, oh, I forgot to submit the 990, or I forgot to submit the final report. So, there's a period where all of a sudden the board now has to step up and assume some real support and accountability for the organization.
At what revenue point does that typically occur that you see?
It really is with the smaller organizations, and from anywhere from the really, really, really tiny ones that are just doing 990 EZs up to oftentimes they can get into a million or two of revenue and not having to. No, that's probably too strong. I would say 750,000 of revenue before they start to trip over themselves like that.
And is that I know that you deal with a lot of smaller nonprofits. Is that 750 and higher typically when they're starting to look at bringing you in?
I have gone in for a lot of the really small ones, simply because they realize that they don't have their act together and they don't know what they're doing. The next level is sort of a different category. It is, okay, you've got a significant organization here, and we need to put controls in place because you don't have them. And so that then becomes the next period, sort of the systems period for the organization, where control is important. But eventually, as it continues to grow, people start to butt up against that control, and they're not able to function, because there are too many controls imposed from a single source. That then needs a spread of authority on the inside of the organization. And so the boards are going to be parallel in this to a certain extent, where there needs to be diversification. So you need to have someone in charge of marketing. You need to have someone in charge of fundraising. You need to have someone in charge of the programming, because one person or two people can't do it all anymore. That period of diversification then almost always ends in some kind of internal conflict, fights between the department. My favorites are the marketing and the development people not wanting to talk to each other because they've got their budget quotas to meet, and so that then ends up being another inflection point where it becomes essential to refocus on the mission and renew the organization. And the boards are going to be changing according to what the needs of the organization are at that point, or the life stage of the organization.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot, but I guess anyone's advice to an executive director would be start with one thing that makes sense.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Start. You don't have to tackle everything, and it doesn't have to be this month. You start with one that you think that makes sense. Listening to this podcast certainly is a good start. Yeah. And then you get some ideas, and some of it is common sense. Some of it, maybe they need to bring an expert in like you, or, read a couple books or articles and kind of go from there. Does that sound like the right
And I
plan?
think especially with boards, one of the real advantages of bringing in someone from the outside is that everybody knows that they don't have a dog in the fight. And if they have, either by experience or training or whatever, if they have credibility, they will be listened to more than will an executive director or a member of the board. I sometimes say, I am often brought in to say again what the executive director has been saying for a year, but nobody ever listened to.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I know we could talk on this for a while.
Yeah.
So, I would just like to very much thank Doug Borwick, CEO of Outfitters 4, for coming on today's podcast, sharing with us some of his ideas and what he's seen as his experience. Doug, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
They can go to the website, outfitters4.com. Or they can email me. Probably the easiest would be just doug@outfitters4.com. And it's Outfitters, OUTFITTERS number 4, the numeral 4.com.
Great. If you like today's podcast, for those listeners, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, you could call us at 862-207-4118, or visit our website at financingsolutionsnow.com. Lastly, if you feel your nonprofit has a unique story relating to how your nonprofit is applying business or leadership tools, please contact me. We are always looking for speakers for our podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for making the world a better place.